Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College. Welcome to our 300th gathering of this monthly roundtable, co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College. We started meeting after 9/11 in person and did so until April 2020 when we held our first virtual gathering. And we were very fortunate at the time to have Alex Yaroslavsky, who is now one of the co-conveners of this breakfast, what we used to call breakfast, with us. Thank you, Alex, for getting us started on this virtual village that we currently have. Our other co-conveners are Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Chloe Choi, and Elizabeth Grossman. These events are recorded each month and they are posted on YouTube, and Nikki will put the YouTube link in the chat so that you can access them. They're also posted on the websites of the co-hosts, the ACRGMY and the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center websites. Each month, we are absolutely thrilled to have with us our colleagues near and far who are able to share with us their thinking, their work, their research, their publications. And I'm so grateful to have you with us this month, Chuck, to share your thoughts, your work, your experiences around Ombuds work. Probably one of the most important branches of the dispute resolution field. When people tell me that they're interested in doing compensated work in this field, I often suggest that they think about Ombuds work, since that is one of the places, one of the fields where this work is recognized and compensated and certified. So thank you so much, Chuck, for bringing to life the work of our colleagues who are doing this in organizational contexts. I'm now going to turn it over to Nikki Borofsky, who is going to more formally introduce Chuck. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you, Maria. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us from wherever you find yourselves in the world for this month's NYC-DR Roundtable Breakfast. Today's program, as Maria alluded, is called The Organizational Ombuds, Guidance for the Ombuds Curious and Mediators. It's a clever title because I suspect that many of us fall into one, if not both, of those categories. Most dispute resolvers have heard of organizational ombuds. Some of us have worked alongside them, but many would be hard pressed to explain exactly where the role overlaps with mediation, where it differs, and why, as Maria also mentioned, organizations are increasingly treating ombuds as programs that are essential to a healthy conflict management system. Few people are better positioned to help us explore these questions than today's speaker, Chuck Doran. Chuck has been mediating since 1992 and is a true pioneer of the ADR field in New England. In 1994, he founded MWI, now one of the country's most respected providers of mediation, negotiation consulting, conflict management training, and ombuds services. He completed his ombuds training in 1995 and began serving as an organizational ombuds in 1997, long before many organizations had even heard the term. Over 3 decades, he's worked with organizations as varied and diverse as Coca-Cola and Oxfam America, the EEOC, and the USPS, while also helping to shape the professional standards that support the field. He is a distinguished fellow of the International Academy of Mediators, a member of CPR's panel of distinguished neutrals, and he is also past president of both the International Academy of Mediators and ACR New England. He is also a recipient of the International Ombuds Association's 2024 President's Award. And if you're wondering, I was searching among some of the other award recipients whether the profession is still gaining traction, consider this. I just saw a posting on the Ombuds blog yesterday by one of the other awardees for a new position at the U.S. Secret Service. So apparently,
Yeah.
even the people responsible for protecting presidents have concluded that confidential listening, informal problem solving, and surfacing concerns early are worthwhile investments. For those of us who were able to read Chuck's recommended articles in advance, you may have noticed a common thread, whether he's examining the relationship between mediators and ombuds, how programs complement HR and compliance, or why a charter matters in the program of an ombuds. He keeps returning to similar ideas. Trustworthy systems matter. It's not just good intentions or good people, but structures that make it safe to raise concerns, seek guidance, and address problems before they become a crisis. So, whether you're joining us as experienced ombuds yourselves, a seasoned dispute resolution resolver, or somebody who is just ombuds curious, I hope you will bring your questions to this presentation and take full advantage of the chance to learn from someone who has helped to shape all of these fields for more than 30 years. Please join me in welcoming Chuck Doran.
Well, thank you, Nikki. Wow, what an intro. That was, I really feel heard or recognized. I mean, in our business, we try to do that for parties, but it's very nice. And I really appreciate you capturing kind of the themes and threads of the really important pieces of how an ombuds works. And that's what we're going to spend some time this morning, talking about. So it's really an honor to be here. It's so nice to be able to talk with all of you, and thank you for waking up. And I know I even see some colleagues from the West Coast, so hats off to all of you. And I know folks from all over the world, so some of you may be late at night or early morning, but hopefully we can make the most use of our time here. My hope is that this can be as interactive as possible, and with the tools we have, we can make use of that. So feel free to make use of the chat if you have questions as we go along, as well as if you want to raise your Zoom hand. And I'm sure that our moderators here at the forum, if we need to bin a question or put it to the parking lot, as many of us do in mediation trainings, we can do that to capture it a little bit later. One thing I want to also mention, Nikki, you mentioned Tom Kozakowski's blog. I'm going to put it in the chat. It is a wonderful resource. It's something that is in the resource section of the slides that I'll be sharing. And by the way, I would be happy to share the slides afterwards. So if folks are wondering, will I get a copy? Yes. I think of it as the paper of record for the ombuds community. And Tom, who's an ombuds at UCLA, does a wonderful job in identifying opportunities and developments in the field and things. So, and he's been doing it for a long time. So feel free to take a peek at that. So, and I also am just looking around the room. I see a bunch of ombuddies. Hey, Jackie, shout out. There's everybody I can see. Donna, boy, Linnell, boy, there's lots of folks. And I'm sure this is only the limited screen I see here, but I really look forward to hearing from lots of different folks today. So I'm going to share my screen and begin with. I just want to, folks, if you haven't joined the Slido app, this will be for polls. I encourage you to do so. You could either scan the QR code or feel free to type in slido.com, and under the meeting ID, if you wanted to put NYC-Ombuds, it should get you there. Okay, so taking a look at how and Nikki, since you covered all these things, those are just kind of the highlights. What I thought we could do with our time here today is to talk about the role of the ombuds. Hopefully we could have a shared understanding of how it has been defined by the International Ombuds Association, which again, another URL for you to have. It's actually ombudsassociation.org, and it's a very helpful resource for folks. Actually, I can just put it right here for you in case it's to make it handy. Okay, and then let's see, right here, and also talking about the standards of practice that govern the work of ombuds. And because I understand, many of us here would consider ourselves either mediators or arbitrators. I'd actually like to ask you that question in a moment, to really talk about how the roles are similar, how they're different, how I oftentimes think of within my Ombuds toolbox is my mediation skills, not only managing the mediation process, but also the skills that we all use for managing the process, interactive listening, effective questioning are all things that I think both ombuds and mediators use. And of course, would love to hear from all of you in terms of your thoughts, your questions. I often tend to take as much as I hope to bring to a meeting like this by hearing people's comments. So we're looking forward to that. So I thought I would kick things off with a question for you. I'm curious if, for those of you who are able to log into Slido, I'm assuming it is. Curious about what best describes your role in ADR. And I'm saying, yeah, and maybe there's many of you who actually do all of these things, but I just say, what do you primarily identify as? And that may be tough for folks, and it would be tough for me, because I both am a mediator and an ombuds and been doing it roughly the same amount of time. So a lot of mediators in the room, it looks like. It's 64%. I'm assuming everybody can see that. And arbitrator, trainer, and we also, don't want to go to there yet. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody can see that, the results. So is this surprising to you, Maria? Is this about what you thought the breakdown would be? Okay. And so interesting, we do have a few buddies here in the presentation, so shout out to my buddies. And mediator, other. Okay, this is really helpful. I also have another question for you. How familiar are you with the role of the organizational ombuds? So curious about, are you trained as an OO and you provide ombud services, whether in the in-house capacity or externally, or maybe you're familiar, or what's an ombuds? I mean, that's new to me. And it's, one of my hopes from this, presentation is we leave with a kind of a better shared understanding of the nuances of what an ombuds is. And one of the hardest things to do is, can we pronounce the name Ombuds? That's kind of one of the biggest challenges. So this is very helpful. It sounds like a majority of you are familiar with familiar with the concept. And it's interesting. So I'm not surprised in a way that, there's about 9-10% who are OOs, organizational ombuds, and provide ombud services. And then some folks are like, hey, this is really new. So I'm glad you're here. Okay. Let's talk about what is an ombuds and make sure we can proceed with the shared understanding. So hopefully you can read that. The text is a little bit small, but so the pronunciation, ombuds, is actually I find this fascinating, a kind of a term, Swedish term that means a person who has an ear to the people. And the IOA, the International Ombuds Association, defines this as someone who actually provides, there's 4 standards of practice. It's confidentiality, informality, independence, and impartiality, which we will talk about a little bit more later. And what we do is provide assistance to members of an organization. So we call them visitors. These might be employees, these might be faculty, these might be staff, this might be students, this might be, and we're talking about organizational ombuds, because I'm sure some of you have heard about like newspaper ombuds who would be there to hear concerns from readers who think like, it's biased in one way, or the coverage is biased or not. But what we're talking about is organizational ombuds. And this assistance that we provide, it takes the form in providing a space to raise concerns. So visitors, could be employees, faculty, staff, whomever. It'd be identifying resources. One thing we oftentimes say as ombuds is we're not the ones who are necessarily providing the solution in the terms of, but we are connecting people to resources. Now, sometimes we do provide a solution through the communication, but oftentimes our job is to connect them with resources. Like an example might be the solution within the organization might be found through working with their HR business partner, but perhaps they were concerned about approaching the business partner because maybe that'll affect their employee record, or there would be some adverse impact on raising the issue. And so the ombuds can serve as that buffer to like maybe even approach HR to say an employee has a concern, what would be the impact of if they came directly to you? Okay. And then also, ombuds do a number of other things, coaching and other services. The other thing that the ombuds does is to not only respond to the concerns and even disputes brought forward by the visitors, but we also will collect trends, themes, systemic problems and issues to leadership without attribution. So we anonymize this information so leadership understand what's really going on in the organization. And so I just published an article in Forbes. It's called, Do You Really Want to Know What's Going On in Your Organization? How an Ombuds Could Help. And I'll share a link to that as well. And actually, I think I can do that right now. Let's see, Control C. Yeah, there it is. So this is again, and Nikki, as you mentioned, kind of the themes that are going on in terms of helping leadership know how an ombuds can help them do their jobs well and understand their employees, their faculty, their staff, things like that. Also, an ombuds is not here to advocate for individuals, groups, or entities, but rather we're advocates for a fair process and transparency, similar to a mediator, at least how I define it. Again, I sometimes say to parties when I do the opening that I do have a bias, and it's a bias for a fair process. And I think the parties appreciate that and find that reassuring. I also think that, ombuds are, considered change agents as well. That's the effect of our work. So our goal is to supplement but not replace formal administrative channels such as HR, employer relations, compliance, legal. And one thing I've discovered, and I'm sure other ombuds and my guess is you would suspect this, that sometimes these formal channels like ER, HR, even compliance think like, is an ombuds a redundant or something that might replace me or make me irrelevant? And sometimes there's, sometimes define them as ombuds detractors, people who will actually take steps to make sure the ombuds doesn't have access to leadership or is not able to do their work as defined by the standards of practice, which is a real, I oftentimes have conversations, and I'm in conversations now with an ombuds who's setting up a new program. And it is, and they wanted to speak with me, and we are speaking about how can I establish a program with integrity? How can I set up a charter, which we'll talk about how that works? How can I get access to leadership so I can provide, and it's amazing about they have been removed not only from the people who they're supposed to serve has been reduced to just one small subset of the organization. They are they don't even have an office anymore. They have a cubicle, which really cuts into the idea of confidentiality. And they're even saying I may be given a cart at the end so I can walk around and help people. I'm like, wow, there's not a lot of people who are helping this person. So we're strategizing about steps they can take. All right. I'm going to keep going. I'm keeping an eye on if there's any Zoom hands that come up or anything more in the chat. And Donna, nice to see you, Donna. I know you, just everybody is an ombuds at Stony Brook. And interesting, represents to, or it's interesting, ombuds translates to representative, And I'm hearing I share represent interests and concerns. Yep. Yeah, it's a nice way to really reframe that concept of representative, because representative could be seen as kind of biased. And thanks for Nikki for posting the SOPs, as we call them, the standards of practice, which has just been revised. But these are the standards of practice. Just to sum them up again, with four, like confidentiality, similar to mediation, that there are protections. There oftentimes is no kind of legal protection in terms of there's no states that actually have legal protections for ombuds. But what we do have is support through contract. It's almost like an ADR agreement to participate, confidentiality agreement with mediation. We have the same in a thing called a charter. And a charter is a document that is endorsed by usually the highest authority within the organization. And this charter says that we, the organization, support the confidentiality of the ombuds, which is a really important piece, because when visitors are considering, should I actually speak with the ombuds, if they hear from the highest authority, the president, the CEO, whomever it is, that we support confidentiality, we're not going to ask who visited the ombuds, but we want to know what was brought up so we can help without attribution. That's really important for a visitor. So that support from leadership, again, ensures that the ombuds program or resource is, again, set up with integrity according to the standards of practice. There are exceptions, of course, to confidentiality, similar to mediation, either, limitations in terms of, if someone's going to harm themselves or somebody else, duty to warn. These are all things that we tell visitors in advance, just like we tell, parties. I'm sure most people here have carve-outs to their agreement to mediate in confidentiality to say that I'm planning to keep everything in confidence unless the following things come up. So people are given information in advance that I understand the rules of the road. And so I'm going to, and this is defined in the charter, but also something that many ombuds will say to the parties in advance, just like mediators would. Another important piece is impartiality. As we said before, we don't represent employees or visitors or the members of the organization. What we we're advocating for a fair process. We are advocating for transparency. Fulfilling our roles as defined within, a charter, and that's really, and that isn't the case with what we call formal channels. So, HR is ultimately there as a member of management to protect the organization. Not to say it's at the cost of the employee, but ultimately, their role. They're not an employee advocacy group, just like employee relations aren't. But the ombuds, again, is not there to protect the company. The ombuds is there, or the university, or whomever the organization is. And so that's another piece that these are discussions that we have with organizations before we start working with them to make it clear that they understand this. And the important also thing is that ombuds also cover the gaps, because there's situations where individuals will fall through the gaps or the cracks when they feel like the concern they have doesn't rise to the level of filing a report or having an investigation conducted, but they still want to talk to somebody and figure out what's going on. And the company also, even though it doesn't meet a certain standard, wants to know what is going on that is going to affect our employees, or what is going on that may cause reputational damage, or whatever the challenge are. Another important concept is informality. And so it's really important to know that the Ombuds is not an office of notice. If you come to the, it doesn't mean that the Ombuds is going to have to report that to either legal or to the organization, but this allows ombuds to have informal conversations. It becomes kind of a barrier-free. And so we are exempt, especially in like a university, to Title IX reporting requirements, to the Clery Act, which also necessitates that, certain roles are not required to report these criminal acts. And these exceptions are oftentimes not easy to secure, because oftentimes legal and HR and others who are looking out for the well-being of the entity, the organization, will say, why are you exempt? I mean, is this going to put us at risk? Like, are we going to get, are we going to lose our accreditation? I just had this conversation with an ombuds recently who is getting arguments, but these are necessary negotiations and conversations that we have to have kind of in advance with the organization to ensure that they both understand and support the unique nature of this role. And lastly, independence is a key piece, and oftentimes it's the reason why a lot of visitors, again, the users of the Ombuds service, will utilize the Ombuds, because of our independence. So we're independent of reporting structures, we're independent of just leadership, and we have to take steps to ensure that we're perceived in that way. Okay, and continuing on. What do ombuds do? We have meetings with visitors. We also, just framing it as leadership consulting, where a lot of times we have information when our ombuds meet with leaders in the different organizations that we work with. And I'll talk about how we're structured at MWI, and I guess you would say our business model is that the ombuds will meet with leadership to say, this is what we're hearing. And if an ombuds hears something that is timely, for example, I remember we did some work with a really large organization, had 300,000 employees, which we had a 10-person ombuds team. It kept us really busy. I remember one time there was right after a retreat, there was about 7 people, all called different ombuds, and they said what this one manager said at this retreat was repulsive. And and what we did, instead of waiting till we met quarterly or whatever, we had to go, and we actually had a system set up where we brought it to legal, and we had permission from different visitors to bring up the person's name, not the name of the visitors, but the person who made the comment. And that was brought, and then the company was able to do its due diligence, they did an investigation, and it was really kind of nipped in the bud. But it was interesting that this ombuds program was set up because of news reports about allowing that showed there were certain high-level executive vice presidents who were doing things that fell into the category of sexual harassment and things like that. So also moving on is that facilitated discussions is a intentional way of framing. It's really another word for a mediation, but intentionally informal. And we've also had a lot of experience when we've set up ombuds resources within companies and universities, is that legal was very concerned about having this kind of in-house ombuds resource. And I think it's something where, despite, as we all know about the informality of the ombuds resource, of mediation, we wanted to stress the informality of an ombuds assisting sometimes visitors who might need to have and benefit from a conversation. And also we do things called group work, and this is where we might go in and do a climate assessment. We might work with a department to do a confidential survey and find out what's going on and facilitate a meeting afterwards. And then, of course, we do workshops, and these would be workshops that I'm sure many of you have delivered in terms of on conflict competence, on effective listening, on difficult conversations. And not only does the goal of the workshop is in place to help build the capacity of visitors to resolve disputes on their own, but as important, it's this idea of engaging with the population that the ombuds are getting to know and become embedded within. And so that's a really important point, that we have a term we call client engagement. So our clients that we work with, we need to engage with them, and this is all conducted by the Ombuds team, because the Ombuds team is building a relationship. And again, just like an embedded reporter, you think of an embedded reporter isn't necessarily part of the organization that it might be covering, but it is still has built relationships with the organization, is getting build up sources, build up connections. That's what ombuds do, is to become embedded within the organization while still maintaining your impartiality and independence. So that's the thinking. Okay, and wanted to provide you with a overview of how we do our work at MWI, and as Nikki mentioned before, is MWI is a organization I founded back in 1994, and I was just thinking back about the thinking behind it, is that when I took a mediation training in 1992, I was really excited about mediating. I was like, wow, I really like this. I think I'm pretty good at it. Probably wasn't at the time, but I think I'm really good at it. And I was saying, I'm ready to go. Who's going to bring me on? And nobody would. I did luckily do some work with the Harvard mediation program and met some wonderful friends and colleagues. But I ended up realizing early that there was plenty of mediators and there's plenty of disputes, but what I think there wasn't enough of people who would convene, like bring together disputants and the mediators. And that was kind of the thinking and behind MWI. And I also brought in a number of teammates. I think I saw Josh Hawk, who has been with MWI for more than 2 decades, has been a wonderful partner, and I think I saw Alice and a number of other folks. So we have a really strong team now. We always, have, but it's been really exciting to that work of bringing people together. And then in '95, I ended up taking a Ombuds training at what was then the Ombudsman Association, dropped the man a few years ago, when it merged with a higher ed based ombuds organization to become the International Ombuds Association. And so back then I took the ombuds training, and we added ombud services similar to how we deliver mediation services. We have panels of mediators, we have panels of ombuds. We provide services externally in the interest of upholding the independence. And yeah, hi Dorcas, nice to, we remember you took our mediation training. It's great to hear you're doing all this great stuff. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of our work at MWI on Ombud services. And first of all, we are an IOA compliant provider, and I think that's important, the SOP, standard of practice, and COE's code of ethics. So that's a really important piece. And I think once you have made that commitment, it's really important to uphold it. We have lost clients, and actually lost because we've stepped away from them because they wouldn't support our goal to be compliant. For example, we've had organizations who would not sign a charter, which tells us they were not fully committed to making sure that they supported. And it's actually in their interest, because you'd think you'd want to sign a charter that upheld the confidentiality of a program, because if you get subpoenaed and you actually have not said that we fully support confidentiality, you're at a risk of being vulnerable, that you may be some secrets that you don't want to have revealed could be revealed. So our commitment is to be IOA compliant. We also have a commitment, all of the organizations we work with, we serve about 14 different clients right now, universities, corporations, nonprofits. They each have a charter that's endorsed by the organization's highest authority. Very, very important. So basically, the president, CEO, director, if it's a federal agency, says, I support the Ombuds. I support the confidentiality. And if you come to the Ombuds, your identity will not be revealed. I also support it being informal, meaning that it's not an office of notice and you can come there without fear that it will turn into an investigation. And the Ombuds won't investigate. It's also independent of the organization. And then lastly, the Ombuds are impartial, and we support that. That's really, really important for a leader to do that. We also have ongoing communication with both formal and informal channels. So it's really important to ensure that, and one other article that I wrote that I'm happy to share the information is about how a ombuds can support and amplify the effectiveness of these formal channels. And this was written in many ways to let, and I share this a lot with HR groups and legal, to say, we're here to be a partner with you to ensure that visitors, those are members of the organization, will get support, and we will work together towards that. So I think that organizations that embrace an ombuds and utilize it have a strong working relationship with these formal channels, HR, ER, compliance, legal. We also work to become embedded, and that takes place in having regular meetings with these formal channels with leadership, and also dealing directly with the visitors through employee resource groups, ERGs, through affinity groups, new hires, all the different things. This is a constant thing. It's not like you achieve embeddedness and you're set. It's just like you can't say, oh, I just surfed the entire internet. I mean, you're never going to do that. There's always new web pages popping up and everything. It's the same with being, I am working to become embedded. And that's something we work to achieve, but also maintain. The way that we convey information to leadership is through usage summaries. Some ombuds call them annual reports. We actually don't use that just because it sounds very formal. So usage summaries talks about the number of visitors, the demographics of the visitors. Again, this is anonymized data, the information they brought, the trends, the different themes that are emerging. And we actually do these on dashboards. So for those of you who are familiar with Tableau, which is a subset of Salesforce, is a very powerful interactive dashboard. We think of it as almost like a heat map that would allow people to, or their leadership to see, well, what's going on? What is it that I don't know? And that's what they want to know. So our ombuds use the dashboards as a vehicle to have conversations with leadership, and they appreciate getting feedback. Usually what might be the effect of a new policy. The people who are dissatisfied with a new policy will come to the ombuds. And I know that a lot of my ombuddies on the call probably saw a lot of this with, for example, return to work policies. Employees had a lot of opinions about what they liked and didn't like. Okay. We also send surveys to each visitor. We ask them about the process. My guess is many of you as mediators might do that. And also about the Ombuds team member. And one thing we do is a thing called Feedback Fridays. And Josh, who I mentioned before, compiles feedback, and 9 out of 10 are super supportive feedback. Sometimes others are not, which we are grateful for, because a lot of times, a complaint is a gift. At least it lets you know what is not working. And we share that feedback with our ombuds, and they have a chance to learn from that, whether it's like what they did that was effective, they keep doing, or that which wasn't, they hopefully readjust. The other piece, and some of you may be familiar, we have certain recognition, meaning like SOC 2 Type 2. And by the way, Robin, I may be able to actually show you the dashboard Uh, yes, I maybe I'll do that. I didn't prepare for that, but I think I can grab it quickly, maybe at the end. So happy to do that. But we're SOC 2 Type 2, and for those of you familiar with that, that's a data security protocol certification. We're also going through the process. Um, yeah, and sorry, Robin. Yes, it won't be confidential. We have a made up company called Acme from our Bugs Bunny days. So it has Daffy Duck as the CEO, I think, and Porky Pig as some other role. So that's Acme, which I should be able to show to you. Um, we're also applying to be ISO 27001. And again, these are just um, external evaluators who assess the integrity of our systems. Like we all, say in our bios and our like, hey, we've done all these great things, but is it anybody else is really saying that? Just like if I call myself a stable genius, that doesn't really mean a lot coming from me. So instead, if we can, identify organizations that can certify us, we're also becoming GDPR certified for our email communication, especially in Europe. And these are all things that provide reassurance to clients that we take data integrity seriously. One thing that may be of interest and is unique to our approach, and once again, one thing you may be picking up is that ombuds practice in different ways, and the majority of ombuds practice in-house, meaning they are actually an employee of the university or company, and they set up an office and do their work. And there may be many of you, especially in academia, who know of or have an ombuds. We approach this externally. And so just like a mediator would work with a company, as an ombuds provider, we contract with the company. We work to do the same things that many ombuds who are IOA compliant in-house ombuds. We are fulfill the standards of practice. We work to become embedded, build relationships with leadership. It's just a different model that is more aligned with the tradition of a mediator. Like I've never heard of an in-house mediator. I don't know if they would be, would work, because again, they're wanting to have that true independence. But that's the thinking, the model behind our thing, because that's what we've been doing for, again, 30 years, and it's really worked out well. But being external, if someone calls us, how are we supposed to know if that person is actually eligible for the service? Are they, like for example, we're working with a university now where one of the ombuds is on leave, and we are providing temporary services. The ombuds actually recommended us, and so we worked with leadership, set up the ombuds service. And what we're doing, and this is what we do with all of our clients, is that we get a read-only file of eligible visitors. So for example, at a university, if it's faculty, we will get information about, name, email, and different information, and maybe even demographics, because if those are the data points that the university wants to learn about, we need to have that in order to provide it. Now, some ombuds will ask the visitor at the beginning or end of their interaction, I want to ask you some questions that are helpful for, demographics. What we found is that visitors oftentimes don't want to talk about information other than what's on their mind. And usually their time is limited and they want to focus on the concerns. So what we do is we import the information, and for example, it might be their tenure at the organization, and it's helpful to know and share with leadership. Well, it so happened that of the 50 visitors that we saw in this quarter, there were half were men, half were women, or the different, again, personal demographics we could share with the organization. We have to be very careful, though, that sometimes if you have too few visitors and you share certain demographics, when you connect them, I know who that is. And so we have a thing called the rule of five, meaning that if there's less than 5 people within a department, you have to take it up. So you wouldn't name the department, but maybe you'll name the school, as opposed to saying this is the Department of Dance. We might say this is the Department of Liberal Arts. I mean, the School of Liberal Arts or a School of Arts or whatever it is. Okay. Another thing that we are very cognizant of is that data is not accessible by the organization's IT department. And I think that's something that because our systems are outside of our clients, it makes it easier. And I know there are ombuds who actually are in-house who actually have taken steps to ensure that their emails are separate from the domain on their own, say, universities or their companies. And these are steps that all ombuds can take, but this is steps that we take to uphold that commitment to confidentiality. And I know that there are visitors who take note of that, because you can say you're confidential, but you really need to really do a real checklist on, are there things that make you not actually fulfill that confidentiality. Also wanted to say that we have a panel of about 30 experienced ombuds. We have a minimum of 5 years experience as ombuds, and most are co-op. That's the Certified Organizational Ombuds Practitioner. The IOA has actually moved to a Certified Organizational Ombuds. They dropped the practitioner piece, and anybody who is a co-op can just apply and transfer over. And also the IOA is now certifying programs, which is a great idea. I think it's just the idea of actually you're working with the organization to say that we support the ombuds, we support a charter, we support confidentiality and everything else. Okay, and also we also have found that visitors want choice. So that means that if they reach out to the ombuds, we provide a minimum of 2, and it's usually they are diverse based on, again, personal demographics and even experience. But having at least 2 ombuds, and sometimes more depending on the number of visitors, it gives people choice. We've worked with many clients with either 300 to 300,000 and we have the systems to actually scale as needed. And then this is an interesting thing. I know that Maria, you mentioned about this concept of that a lot of times when asked, like people who are wanting to get into the ADR field, like, tell me about the realities of being in this field. And I think that, having both served as a mediator and an ombuds, I mean, the ADR field is not for the faint of heart. I think we could all kind of agree on that. But what I found is with mediation is that, to put it bluntly, you eat what you kill. I mean, you mediate and then you go off and you look for your next game. And in many of us, for example, I've appreciated like mediating for the Postal Service over the years, and they reach out a lot. Or we do a lot of work with auto franchise, so we have contracts with large manufacturers that refer us cases. And that takes time. But what's interesting is with ombuds work that you're actually entering into a contract with the organization. And the way we have it set up is that we actually have a minimum number of hours that we provide to a client each month, and regardless of whether or not visitors reach out to us or not. So they will pay us a monthly fee. But it's not that we just sit back and hope visitors don't reach. We want people to come in, and how do you get people to reach out to us is by raising awareness about these. So the ombuds are very busy, especially with a new client, delivering workshops, meeting with leadership, meeting with formal channels such as HR, ER, compliance, meeting with the affinity groups and employee resource groups, meeting new hires, writing articles, delivering workshops. And so we make it our business to make sure we use up each of those hours, and that's either in the form of raising awareness, or some clients that we work with have been around for decades. And that is something where, because we are embedded, we do less client engagement because we have so many visitors coming in. We still have to do some, but that's just, but the reason I put this diversified client portfolio, this is, I think, an important piece that we've learned, that by having multiple clients, it allows us to have tough conversations with new clients and existing who are wanting to, I would even say, misuse the Ombuds resource. So, for example, we had an incident recently where we worked for probably it was actually 3 years, talking with a company that had an established Ombuds resource. And we were going through the contracting process, and we were all set up to deliver. This is a big client. And when it came down to really making signing the contract, we had said earlier, and we said it's really important for us to meet the person we're ultimately reporting to. In this case, it was the CEO. And they said, no, you can't do that. And I was like, well, help me understand, how are we going to bring information? It says, well, you can go through HR. And I said, well, HR is not the CEO, and that's not compliant with IOA. The other thing that they wouldn't do is sign a charter. And even though they said they would. So we had to walk away from that, which was very difficult. But at the same time, because we have a diversified, client portfolio, we're still able to work with the other ones. And I definitely have appreciated that ombuds who actually work with one organization, when they're asked to make hard decisions and they've maybe moved to that area to serve that client, that's a tough spot. And I really want to make sure that, and I've been thinking a lot more and wanting, to talk with like the International Ombuds Association about what is the IOA doing to actually support individual ombuds who are in-house, who are faced with these of, am I going to stand up for the ombuds resource and make a hard, and maybe even lose my position because I'm not complying with what they think is right. I see this all the time. It's a really tough challenge. Not to say we're exempt from it. We've been impacted too, but that is a reality in this field. Which, again, back to the earlier point, Maria, about this is a tough field, whether you're an ombuds or mediator. Okay. Folks, I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to go back to your Slido if you don't mind. What is your best guess of what % of an organization do you think uses an ombuds resource within an organization annually? It's whether the ombuds is in-house or external. What are you thinking? Okay, interesting. So the results are coming in. I know we have 101 people on our call today, and we have 16 who voted. So if you haven't joined us yet, in terms of, if you want to scan there, feel free. Okay. Pretty good sample size. All right. Well, so I'm going to let it wait a little bit longer. I've been yapping a pretty long time too. Take a drink. All right. Well, guess what? You're right. Oh, maybe I spoke too soon. right, so I am going to, it's a close one, and it's so interesting because I guess I'd still say you're still right. So the answer is typically, and any of my buddies, if you want to, push back on this, but typically about 1 to 3% of an organization will utilize an ombud. So if you have 100,000 employees, you might see 1,000 or 3,000 visitors. And again, these visits might be an hour-long conversation or it might be something that takes place over many, even weeks, because sometimes cases are complicated. I will say there are some clients that are actually, closer to 10 or 11% utilization. But it's rare, at least in our experience, of that 28 to 30%. Although I'd love to hear if there's other things. So, um, so the sorry, yeah. So the answer is 1 to 3% in general, and which is still, it's a it doesn't mean, so that's, again, if you're talking about 1,000 people, you're talking about 10. If you're using these stats, or 30 if you're at 3%, but a new program, especially that's not known and people are still trying to figure out to trust. I mean, it's been endorsed by leadership. Is it going to be trustworthy? I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Okay. Um, I wanted to just as we're wrapping up, and because I really would be curious about, I wanted to leave some time for questions and things. Wanted to share just some thoughts, just maybe to start, kind of conversation. But thinking about how, mediators and ombuds, there's some similarities in terms of the process. As we think, I think a primary one, of course, is confidentiality in terms of both the interactions we have with parties, as we say in mediation, or visitors, as we say in the ombuds context, and how important that is to both, offer to the folks we work with, but also to protect. Um, Active listening skills is I know probably the most used, not only when I do ombuds work, visiting with visitors or even with leadership. And it's fascinating how, I remember with one client we worked with, as soon as we rolled out the program, guess who the first visitor was? It was the CEO. They just, and because oftentimes, folks are just don't know who to talk to, and we found that leadership and middle management will utilize the ombuds. This idea of open-ended questions, speaking about whether you're conducting a mediation process or in discussions as an ombuds. Hopefully we don't know the answer, and hopefully we're not pushing people to an outcome, but we're asking them about, help me understand why you're here today. What is kind of the current challenge, and what are you hoping it becomes? Um, really asking questions that are based on curiosity and inquiry. Um, Also, with, at least I think of, like, a mediator's job is really to manage the process. I remember a colleague of mine said, and we've put this in our mediation training manual. And Clarice, I know you as know this one, is that the mediator is responsible for the process and the parties are responsible for the outcome. And I think the same is true in ombuds, is that we set up a process. With the creation of the charter is in many ways a process set up. The way we do a mediator's opening in mediation, and we do an ombuds opening when we meet with visitors. So to let them know the process before we begin, so people are on the same page and hopefully they have a sense of security. And then, I was once a TA for Roger Fisher when at Harvard at the program instruction for lawyers, and I've felt like my work from getting to yes really has influenced my work both as a mediator, as an ombuds, as a trainer, and it really comes down to understanding their interests, their hopes, their goals and needs, and thinking about options and how does that compare to their alternative, their BATNA, and objective standards. All of these things, again, help me as a whether a mediator or an ombuds, to help the visitor or the parties have a new and productive conversation. and also just thinking about thinking about how do ombuds and mediators differ? I mean, I share some of my thoughts, and I would welcome if people have different perspectives. But when I think of, the purpose, I think of mediation as more short-term and goal-oriented. I don't think of a mediation. I mean, sometimes a mediation may last months, and I'm sure many of us have done it, maybe even over a span of a year. But ultimately, I found, we're here to help the parties define what are you hoping to achieve and to see if there can be an outcome that meets both sides' interests. It leaves them off better than where they started. But it's interesting that the opposite is true in terms of our purpose, in terms of with ombuds is more of a kind of a systemic approach of building a working relationship with the organization while still maintaining our independence and impartiality. And also, our purpose is to become kind of embedded. I think of the kind of the analogy of, a mediator may put out a fire that's, both parties have said, there's a fire. We were unable to negotiate on our own. We need your help. Whereas an ombuds is more of a smoke detector to point to the resources, say, there's a little smoke over here and there's some embers that could flare up, and I wanted to give you a heads up. We've actually heard reports of this smoke from a number of sources. Can't tell you who told us, but it's in this department. It's with these players, and and again, the ombuds doesn't have the authority, or it's not the responsibility to put out the fire themselves, but rather to notify the organization that there's smoke and probably a fire soon enough. And thinking, I guess, the same in terms of the process. Again, I think of mediation as more, short term. We define at our mediation training, thinking of, mediation as an opportunity for the mediator to serve as a negotiation consultant. And I use the 7-element getting to yes framework to assist not only the parties to have a new and different conversation, but also, we use the 7-element framework to, in advance, we ask the parties to prep, to think about what are your interests, what options have you thought of, what are the other side's interests from your perspective, what are the alternatives, what do you think the other side's alternatives are, what objective standards apply here. And all of these things also influence my conversations, with visitors as an ombuds. And it's also interesting is that with the role, the same thing. We talked about the mediators there to assist the parties to negotiate, at least as I'm defining it. And then ombuds is actually to surface and ideally resolve the concerns that brought the visitor to the ombuds, but also bringing information to leadership and these formal channels to say, this is what we're hearing. And oftentimes, this information will align with what leadership and formal channels have already heard about, but they hear it from a new angle, and it helps them, how it works. And it just reminds me, there's an article I published just recently. Again, it's called "Would You Like to Know What's Really Going On in Your Organization? How an Ombuds Can Help," is on this theme. And there's a case study in there that actually talks about a situation that I think really outlines how an ombuds works. And then as we think about the outcome, again, with mediation, there's going to be an agreement or not. Or maybe if the parties came to perhaps work on their working relationship so that might be the goal of the mediation. Again, I don't think of our role as a mediator to fix their relationship, because if they're going through a divorce or whatever, but perhaps to understand what their interests are around the relationship and help them meet those goals. And then with the ombuds, in terms of the outcome, it doesn't end. I mean, we have clients, for years, and that's what it really should be, because we become more embedded and we become more effective, and we have stronger working relationships. And I would hope that we're working to be somewhat indispensable, where they say, this is not just a provider of training or will help resolve individual disputes, but is providing us with insights that we cannot get elsewhere. This is a really valuable resource, and that's what I think all ombuds, strive to become. And then lastly, with the focus, I kind of think of it with mediation. You're focusing on the principles, and you're focusing on the parties' interests and helping them develop an outcome that leaves them better off. And then lastly, the ombuds is actually focusing on both the visitors who come, but also on organizational dynamics and making sure that information that should surface can, and to bring that information to those who can implement change, namely leadership and those formal channels. So those are, just a few thoughts, and I really appreciate folks, listening, and I would welcome just to kind of open up the conversation.
As people warm up, and thank you so much. It was a really rich presentation. There are just two kind of big questions, I think, that follow along some of your last points, and maybe people want more concrete information. One of them is assuming that the identity statements and concerns of the visitors are strictly confidential. Practically, how does an ombuds include others into that process, perhaps via a mediation or a dialogue, while still protecting and maintaining that confidentiality? Can you give a few examples, maybe?
Yeah, and it's an important question. So in the ombuds context, one of this pushes back to the importance of a charter. And as I mentioned, and actually I have I wrote a article on what is a charter, and with a colleague, Chuck Howard, who is a former executive director of the IOA and a real leader in the field. But for those of you who want to read about that, there's an article there. One thing that we've done in our charters, and I realize it's kind of unique, and I hope other ombuds consider doing this if they don't do it already, but we've actually folded in an agreement to participate in our charter. So we're not asking people, nor should we or can we, to sign agreement to mediate if you're mediating as a mediator, as an ombuds, because again, that would create a record, and it's antithetical to what we're doing in our informality of an ombuds. So we offer services. We intentionally, as I mentioned before, call it facilitated discussions and not mediation. And then we proceed with all of the confidentiality protections based on what's identified in the charter, more specifically in this section on the confidentiality on facilitated discussions and the terms at which you would participate.
Great. Oh, go ahead. There are a couple more that have popped up that maybe you want to respond to, or
Yeah, so why don't I just go in the order, and if I miss anybody, so Bill, you mentioned about, is it ethical or customary for an outside ombuds to, in the engagement agreement, I'm assuming that's setting up a contract, limit liability for release of information. Yeah, so yes, and it's interesting. So the contracting process is really important, but at the same time, though, I I it's interesting. I'm trying to imagine like what information might be released from an ombuds, and it's yeah, and it's interesting because it also gets to, we also have a clause within the contract to say that if we are subpoenaed, then we will actually partner with the organization we're working with to resist the subpoena together. And that's one of the reasons why naming the or expressing, in no uncertain terms of the organization and more specifically the highest leaders' support of the confidentiality is imperative, because what we've want to see happen is that we would want to tell a court, and again, this is a lot of information that Chuck Howard and I have talked about and he's shared, is he's said that what you want to do is to show that people used the Ombuds resource because they relied on the fact that it's confidential. So for you to actually go back and say, well, I'm going to actually comply with the subpoena, it goes against the promises that you made to the people who have used the organizational Ombuds service. So that in itself is something, at least, that has been the grounds when Chuck has defended subpoenas based on that, because this was a understanding of, and people relied on that information. So I hope that answers that, and if not, I'm happy to follow up if you want to send. I know there was another, Mark, you asked a question. Would you share your brief 1 to 3 sentence explanation that you would give to a skeptical business leader on why a company would invest in an Ombuds resource? It's such a great question, and it's oftentimes the business leader does come across as skeptical because, again, they're doing their due diligence to make sure, testing it, stress testing this resource. And it's interesting that what we've really turned to is trying to step back from trying to push an Ombuds. Like, who really wants an Ombuds? People can barely it's pronounce it. It's rather, what's the effect of it? And to say that, let's talk about why we're talking in the first place. And they might say, we are losing employees of maybe a certain background or skill set or whatever, or that we've worked to try to bring in, and we don't know why. And so that might be a way that you can hear from employees before they leave to understand their concerns and address them. Or if their concern is, like, we were talking with a large organization just recently, and they had concerns about there was some ethical violations that weren't being caught by compliance. And they just thinking, how could we actually give people a safe place where they can report not really report, but raise their concerns about maybe information they know. Because people are scared, like, I know there's something wrong that's going here, but I don't have a vehicle. And there's a classic story, which some of you may have heard, but I find it really fascinating. There was an example of this, there was an executive assistant who they worked for a EVP, and this EVP was getting very creative on their expense accounts. This is a true story. And actually it happened to with one of the visitors at a different company. But what happened was the executive assistant didn't know where to turn, because if they went to compliance, it would probably be open investigation. And if the EVP were to get out of it, there's a really good chance that the executive assistant's life would be made very difficult, or potentially they'd be pushed out. So the executive assistant went to the Ombuds and said, here's my challenge. My boss is doing things with expense accounts, putting in things where they weren't really, they were getting paid for things they didn't actually spend. So they talk through what are some options, and in the spirit of ensuring that the issue could be addressed, but not potentially implicating the executive assistant, they came up with an idea to actually go to compliance and ask compliance to do an audit of all of the executive VPs. So it wasn't just the one. And they did that. And not only did they smoke out this one person, but they smoked out like 3 others who were doing the same thing. And as a result, they were terminated because they had a very, very strong, anti-stealing policy. And the executive VP was, could sleep at night thinking like, I'm not complicit in this. I did something about it. So that I think is just a really important, way that ombuds provide value. And sometimes a story like that, Mark, goes a long way with, talking to a skeptical business leader. But ultimately, it has to come down, that skepticism has to shift to support. If it doesn't work, if that doesn't happen, the ombuds resource will not be set up. Right, great question. Yeah, and thanks for posting that, Nikki, about, well, yeah, that's the art, but there's another really great book. Let's see, I have it right here. It's called A Practical Guide to Organizational Ombuds, How They Help People in Organization by Chuck Howard. If you're looking, it's a wonderful book that it's really designed for potential users of ombuds in terms of those who hire an ombuds. It's the first 100 pages describe some of the technical aspects of an ombuds, but the rest of it, there's about 300 or 400 pages of stories from ombuds about their work, and it's intended to demystify the role. Mike, I see you have a question there, and you're saying many companies do exit interviews. Rarely do they remain confidential. Yeah, and that's a great, point, that an ombuds can help a company understand why it is that someone is leaving in an unfiltered way. So you get all of the content without sharing the identity, especially if you have a number of people leaving at a certain time. So to provide employees hopefully a chance to share their concerns before they end up leaving, saves, has the company keep people they want to keep, and also not have to worry about, as we know, it takes about 6 or 8 months for an employee after they're hired to become somebody who reaches a level of productivity that the company is looking for. I remember Robin's earlier question about sharing a dashboard, which I will look at, but I want to, Amanda, you said, how do you evaluate your work? Do orgs link the outcomes of your work to pulse climate surveys and other employee engagement metrics? Yeah, that's a really important. Well, there's a couple of different ways. One is we do send surveys, as I mentioned earlier, to visitors, which provide us with specific feedback about their experience. Another question that we ask, and I know many ombuds do this, is what would you have done if you didn't use the ombuds? Which is really an important question, because people will sometimes say, I would have left, I would have gone to legal, I would have gone to my newspaper, whatever it was. These are usually things that are less preferred outcomes. We also look at those metrics, as we talked about. If an organization typically uses 1 to 3%, what is that? I think also there's ideally a lot of goodwill that is built up through our interactions. And again, I think of the organizations that make best use of the ombuds. They have strong support from leadership, especially the top. And going back to this example of, I'm talking with a colleague who's setting up a brand new ombuds resource. And what's interesting is that this person is hitting roadblocks right at one after the other. And by chance, they actually met the highest person in the organization at a conference. And it was a wonderful experience. And the leader said, so what are you doing with our company? And they said, well, I'm your ombuds. They said, oh, really? Great. That sounds like it's something we need. And I was talking to this colleague, I was saying, that might be your golden ticket, for you to revisit that, to follow up. And so they actually have a meeting with the chief of staff, who they already know. And I was encouraging them to be very explicit about if you want an ombuds and you want the benefits of it, I need your support, because they are getting pushback from legal, from HR, from ER. Again, this is this one who is in a cubicle now. And so it's, if they can get that buy-in to say, I support this, make it work. It's not a question of, let's have conversations of if this ombuds will stay. It's rather under what conditions. So the negotiation about charters and about who you report to and about access to leadership is not an if, but it's a how conversation. Okay.
Well, there was
All
a
right.
question about how to set up an ombuds office within a college university, but I also want to harken back to one of the questions that was posted earlier on that asked, what do you see as emerging issues arising from visitors who are using ombuds services? Are there any trends or themes that you see these days?
In terms of, yeah, what we're seeing, I it's interesting. There's a lot of impact about the current administrations, better, especially in the federal sector. And even though it's encouraging to see that there is a federal agency that is looking to revive the ombuds resource, about 15 were decimated, wiped out. That these are strong, healthy programs that are no longer here. Um, there's a lot of tensions between different generations that we're seeing in terms of like millennials and work styles with Gen Xers, and these things have, the good thing is they're be able to surface through the Ombuds resource, and the Ombuds could do everything from hold facilitated discussions to run workshops on about understanding different cultures and things. But it's interesting. Each client has unique, things that we try to bring forward. Um, I will say that I'm going to show you that dashboard briefly, and again, and Jackie, thanks for offering to show that. But I was able to pull it up. So let me just share my screen and just hopefully you find this interesting or helpful. And this is a question about how do we convey information to our clients. And let me just see if I can. I'm actually going to see if I can make this just a little bit smaller, just so you can see everything. Hopefully that works for everybody. So just so you know, this is what we call our Ombuds dashboard, which is based on information that is entered into what we call the Ombuds tracker, which is a customized version of Salesforce. And what leaders can do, and they have access to this, you can put in information for certain time periods. This section stays constant, and it provides some, and all of these things you can click on. And for example, these are IOA categories that we actually used to use in 24 and 25, IOA, International Ombuds Association. They have uniform reporting categories. We actually created our own tracking categories because we felt they needed to be updated. But what it allows you to do is to click, and over on the right gives you a breakdown, like under career progression and development, how are these impacted and how many cases here. We also, going to each tab here, we wanted to share about information about the impact of our work. So what's the direction of concern? Are people raising concerns that go up, maybe about a manager or about leadership? Do they go down? Maybe this is two-way direct report. Is it self or is it parallel dispute? So we can do this, and we talk about types of organizational impact. What do the ombuds do in response to all these different things? Many times organizations want to know about who actually utilizes the ombuds resource. And we collect this information. Not everyone shares it, but where are they calling in from? How long have they been with the company? What's their generation? We also talk about, and this is really important to become embedded, but what are we doing as an organizational ombuds provider to engage, to work to become embedded within the organization? And this, we have meetings with key stakeholders. We met with the President's Council, and who did it? Or we shared materials or did informational presentations. We also share the results of feedback. And, again, what would happen, my most valuable experience, what would I have done if there was no ombuds? And these are actual quotes that we get. I know other ombuds get similar ones. And lastly, we share case stories, and we break it down by what was the issue, what did the ombuds do in terms of Ombuds Act, and what was the outcome. So each client has a customized version. They have their own logo on there, and it's updated nightly. And the only reason that if the population is too small and we run the risk of we don't want to, if you only have 4 cases in a particular quarter, people can connect it. So we are cognizant of that, but usually the bigger clients, we're able to update it regularly.
Thank you for that. That's a great resource for us to be able to actually see inside the kind of the nature of what kind of feedback you're able to give to the organizations you work for. There was a question by Andrea that I wanted to pose on her behalf, and she's saying many people are drawn to ombuds work because they've personally experienced organizational conflict. For someone who was legally found to have been wrongfully terminated after raising concerns, how is that kind of lived experience viewed by employers and the ombuds profession? Can it be an asset in developing empathy and understanding, providing the individual can maintain neutrality? Is that something that you find is a common thread?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I do want to just keep an eye on the clock too, so I'll be brief. And I know that we all have stuff to do. Um, it's a couple of things. This gets back to almost like an age-old question, and I'll be asking all of you this. Do you share your personal experience with parties? And, I think there's different people answer it in different ways. They say, I do share. I do share the fact that I was terminated, or that I went through a lawsuit, or I was divorced, or whatever the background is. So I think it's a personal choice, but I think ultimately it's less about that being a selling point for you if you're looking, Amanda, to maybe get into the field. I think it's more of like, what can you do to help the entity that you're working with, whether it's parties in a mediation or an organization that you're setting up an ombuds for. And I think that sharing personal anecdotes and history, in my experience, is a game time decision you make when you're with a party in a private session or in a mediation. But I don't know if that's something that is, because I think it takes away from, because I think it should be 90% about the group. If you're especially trying to persuade them to set it up, it's about them, and 10% about you. So I'm sure there's other perspectives too.
And there've been a few more questions I know that are burning, but one I wanted to actually pause here and remind people, encourage people to read your articles. And I think in one of them you said ombuds do like to have lunch and talk with individuals that have burning questions, especially about the kind of nitty gritty of how setting up a practice goes, or engaging your services go, or the kind of career path to becoming an ombuds person goes. So I want to put that there, and say that we'll give your best contact information with the recording, if that's okay with you, and give you the opportunity to just to close, since at the hour we do like to respect people's time, and give you a final word before thanking you for this great presentation.
Oh yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. While I can't, talk with everybody about all their questions, I am going to provide some resources for folks. I also think many of these resources, like the Emerging Ombuds Network and IOA, they have different groups and committees that are designed to help and support people. I do appreciate people's interest in this. If you're going to sign up for anything, I think Tom's blog here, which I put in the chat, is a wonderful resource for understanding kind of what's going on and what opportunities exist in the field. But I really appreciate this opportunity to present and people's attention and great questions. And I hope everybody has a great day.
And thank you so much, Maria.
Yeah, on behalf of all of us, Chuck, thank you so, so much for a very rich, informative, stimulating session. We often hear about how lonely it is to be an ombuds person in an organization because of the confidences that one is expected to maintain and don't want to be seen with certain parties because the kinds of impressions it gives. So it's always really helpful to hear how people navigate that very complicated landscape. So thank you for being with us this morning. We truly appreciate it. And for the rest of you, we look forward to seeing you next month, July 2nd, when we will have a conversation around AI, both the mediator and arbitrator AI with Jeff Zano and Andrew Barton from the American Arbitration Association. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Nikki, again for your amazing work in the chat and keeping everyone informed about um, information as it's coming up. Thank you, everyone, for coming and see you next month.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.